Lincoln and Reagan be proud that it knelt before Donald Trump's altar? Whatever you want to say about Mark Sanford, who Trump's people knocked off in yesterday's primary, you need to add this. At least when he embarrassed himself a few years back, at least the love was real. The Republicans now beckoning to Trump's allure cannot even claim that. That's Hardball for now. Thanks for being with us. All In with Chris Hayes starts right now.
Tonight on All In.
I'll do anything to protect Mr. Trump.
The president's lawyer at a legal crossroads.
Michael Cohen is a very talented lawyer.
Tonight, could Michael Cohen's sudden break with his own attorneys be a prelude to a flip or a pardon?
Are you thank you very much?
Thank you.
Stupid question.
Then,
I will say proudly that the Republican Party is the Trump Party.
the Trump takeover of the Republican Party.
It's becoming a cultish thing, isn't it?
And the candidates he's bringing with him.
I'm proud to be here with this flag.
And NBC News gets inside the detention facility that locked out Senator Merkley.
Can I go in with you, please?
I'll talk to the leader of the House Freedom Caucus about the Trump child separation policy when All In starts right now. Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. The president's longtime lawyer and consigliere is losing his own personal legal team, and that could be really bad news for the president. Michael Cohen, who was raided 2 months ago by federal investigators in Manhattan, is about to part ways with his own attorneys, according to multiple reports, and is expected to hire new counsel to represent him in the ongoing federal probe. This comes ahead of a June 15th deadline this Friday, just 2 days from now, to review all the material seized in those raids, 3.7 million files, including shredded documents that FBI agents had to piece back together. The legal scrutiny on Cohen has unnerved his former boss, who lashed out over the raid memorably during an unrelated national security meeting.
So I just heard that they broke into the office of one of my personal attorneys. Good man, and it's a disgrace. It's frankly a real disgrace. It's an attack on our country in a true sense. It's an attack on what we all stand for. That is really now in a whole new level of unfairness.
There are conflicting reports now about why Cohen is splitting with his legal team and what it means for his case. According to the Wall Street Journal, Cohen's lawyers are the ones choosing to quit the case. ABC News reporting that a fee dispute is among the reasons, which is interesting. The New York Times citing payment of legal bills of one of Cohen's lawyers, Stephen Ryan. Now, the Times and ABC both suggest this development increases the odds that Cohen will cooperate with investigators and potentially give evidence against his old boss, who happens to be the president of the United States. But, I should say, it's not clear yet that's the case. The person close to Cohen told Vanity Fair's Gabe Sherman that Cohen hasn't flipped yet. Quote, he's sending up a smoke signal to Trump, I need help. And according to NBC News, Cohen has not even spoken with prosecutors to discuss what he could offer them. But based solely on the information that's already public, without access to those 3.7 million files, Cohen may have a pretty interesting story to tell. We know he served as the president's bag man and his hush money payments to Stormy Daniels, which the president lied about before eventually admitting what happened.
Michael would represent me and represent me on some things. He represents me like with this crazy Stormy Daniels deal. He represented me, and, you know, from what I see, he did absolutely nothing wrong.
Now we know that Cohen used the same slush fund he set up to pay off Stormy Daniels to take hundreds of thousands of dollars from corporations seeking access to the Trump administration. And we know that Cohen may have key information related to the Russia probe. One of the companies that paid Cohen is linked to one of Russia's richest oligarchs, Viktor Vekselberg, who reportedly met with Cohen both during the transition and at the inauguration. Before that, Cohen was actively pursuing secret efforts to build a Trump Tower in Moscow throughout the campaign in 2016. And he was identified by name in the Steele dossier, crucially, as an intermediary from Trump world to Kremlin agents. I'm joined now by two reporters who've been covering the story. Michael Cohen, Josh Gerstein, senior White House reporter for Politico, and Christina Wilkie, White House reporter for CNBC. Christina, let me start with you. What do we make of today's news?
This is a new phase in the Cohen investigation. It's important to say no charges have been filed. We still don't know what charges would be brought against Cohen. But anytime someone under investigation changes lawyers, the investigation enters a new phase, and that's what we're looking at.
Josh, what are you hearing from the folks that you're talking to in Cohen's circle or that know him?
Well, I understand that this has been expected for some time. Maybe it's been in the works for about a month or so. What I'm told by sources that are familiar with his thinking is that there was never really an expectation that he would go into a serious criminal justice process with the legal counsel he has right now. The people he had on this team were basically brought on to deal with the congressional investigations and document production, and not really to hash out either a plea deal or to go to trial on some kind of a criminal charge, which I think Michael Cohen had no idea he would possibly face when this process started. And so I think what we're seeing here is some movement in that direction, which could lead to a plea deal and maybe flipping on the president, and could just be part of the normal process leading to some criminal charges.
So just to clarify, these attorneys are retained by Cohen before he finds himself raided by the FBI.
That's exactly right. They were involved in sending those documents up to Capitol Hill that were being demanded by various committees investigating the Russia-Trump affair.
We should say that, what do you want to say, Christina?
I wanted to say one big unknown right now in the Cohen investigation is what his longtime business partner, Evgeny Friedman, the so-called taxi king of New York, told prosecutors. He struck a deal on, I believe, May 22nd to have tax fraud charges reduced significantly. He did a lot of business with Cohen over many years, and so I think that's really a wild card right now into what Cohen could be looking at when he makes the tough decision, perhaps, about entering into a criminal situation or a plea deal.
Josh, one of the questions I think here is Cohen facing exposure or interest from investigators for things unrelated to Russia or related to Russia? And I want to read you this piece of BuzzFeed reporting. FBI agents investigating Russia's interference in the election learned that Cohen was in frequent contact with foreign individuals about Trump Moscow. Some of these individuals had knowledge of or played a role in 2016 election meddling, according to 2 FBI agents. It would put him, that sort of bit of reporting would put him more squarely in the kind of portfolio of Mueller than maybe we'd initially thought based on those raids.
Yeah, I think there's definitely interest in having Cohen answer more questions about his dealings with Russia during the campaign. And there's no question if he cut a plea deal with prosecutors that Mueller's team would want to debrief him on a variety of different subjects. But that said, we should remember that Mueller's prosecutors laid this case off, essentially referred these issues up to New York for prosecutors in the Southern District to take over. And so it's fair to assume that the thrust of what's being investigated at the moment remains these sorts of fraud issues, maybe the campaign finance issue involving Stormy Daniels, and the Russia issue is maybe lurking there in the background.
Christina, do we have any sense of the timeline here?
Well, we've heard numerous reports today that the Cohen could be indicted, or even people were tossing around the word arrested in the next week. That seems to me premature, as we understand that he was interviewing other potential lawyers today. As many as 3 different firms. So once, hopefully in the next week he'll decide on his counsel, and I think that's the next step that we're looking at.
Josh, do you know if there's a financial problem here for Cohen in terms of paying for these legal bills, which have to be mounting up very quickly?
Well, I've heard from people close to the case that there is concern about the financial cost. Remember, the big task they've been performing over the last few weeks involved maybe dozens of lawyers involved in going through all these millions and millions of pages of documents and email messages and voice recordings that you mentioned as part of this search warrant related process. So that's a lot of legal hours being billed at a pretty significant law firm. It must have run up a really large tab for Mr. Cohen. And one of the questions that's lingering out there, is that a tab that the Trump organization or President Trump himself is helping pay, or is Mr. Cohen simply on the hook for that whole bill?
All right, Josh Gerstein and Christina Wilkie, thank you both.
Thanks, Chris.
For more on what losing his lawyers means for Michael Cohen's case, I'm joined by MSNBC legal analyst Nick Ackerman and Jill Wine-Banks, both former Watergate prosecutors. And Nick, I'll start with you. It's worth noting that Rick Gates, who is in a similarly kind of torturous situation in which there was, interest from investigators, and then was he or was he not going to cooperate? He hired new lawyers right before he pled guilty.
Right, but that doesn't necessarily mean that because Cohen is getting new lawyers that he's cooperating. Right. Because you have to look at what's been going on the last few weeks or last month or so. He has been cooperating with Trump's lawyers to go through all of those documents and all of those tapes that were seized in the search warrants. They're getting pre-discovery that they normally wouldn't get. Exactly what people saw Trump trying to get with respect to that informant that spoke to Carter Page, spoke to other members of his campaign staff. What they're trying to find out is what's in those documents.
What do they have?
What liability lies out there for Donald Trump? Cohen is cooperating with that. You've got Donald Trump, who has the privilege. The privilege belongs to him. It belongs to Sean Hannity, who's also involved in this, who's telling people on national TV that they should destroy their evidence if they're going in to see Mueller. So when you put all of that together, you've got Cohen currently and over the past number of weeks cooperating with the Trump people to try and understand what is there. And so the fact that he's going to new lawyers, there's lots of reasons why people go to new lawyers. To give you an example, again, it's speculation. Assume that he told these lawyers the truth about what happened, but now he intends to go in and lie under oath. Those lawyers can't represent him if they know he's going to lie. So he has to get a new lawyer.
It also strikes me that Jill, that it could be a financial. I mean, it could be as simple as the fact that he can't afford these people anymore. He doesn't strike me as someone who's particularly liquid. Having worked in prosecution, how do you bring in someone like this? Like, what's the process by which one works over someone you're trying to get to cooperate?
Well, let me expand on something Nick just said, because I think one of the things that's going on in my mind is that Cohen may be being penny wise and pound foolish, because the lawyers he currently has know all those documents. They have spent, and they will be paid for, all the time they put in understanding all the legal liabilities that he has, and if he gets new lawyers, they're going to have to review all of those documents from scratch. So he's doubling his legal fees. So it's not such a good idea to have let them go. And in terms of what it means for a potential future prosecution, it's simply that the government will now get all of those documents. Remember, the special master, Barbara Jones, has found less than 1%. Right. All the documents seized. Less than 1%. He's not a lawyer. He wasn't acting as a lawyer. So nothing is really protected by attorney-client privilege. And so now the government is going to get all of those, and they will be able to determine how many crimes and of what nature those crimes are. And some of them may be passed back to Mueller because they relate directly to his travel to Prague, for example, which McClatchy reports they have evidence that supports what was in the dossier. And so we need to see whether there are state tax charges that could be brought in addition to federal charges in New York, Southern District, or in the District of Columbia by Mueller.
What do you think the process is now from the Mueller team in terms of what their strategy is with him?
Oh, I think the strategy is pretty straightforward. I mean, they want to see him, the vice closed.
Squeeze.
Right, they want to squeeze him big time. They want him to be indicted for as many different crimes as he can. Just as Jill said, if he's indicted in the state, that's great. It takes away the pardon power because Trump can't pardon anybody who's got state crimes. There are plenty of state crimes here, money laundering, tax evasion. If he was involved, as the dossier points out, with respect to the break-in, with the emails into the Democratic National Committee, there are New York computer crime laws. I mean, he could be tied up all different ways. And they're certainly going to be looking for very specific evidence tying him into the Russian probe.
Yeah, we should say that this Ukrainian politician who gave testimony, who was given gave a peace deal to Michael Cohen, who gave to Michael Flynn that would essentially drop sanctions on Russia, which is slightly suspect. He says that Mueller grand jury questions focused on Cohen, Jill. So there's very recent evidence, this piece just published a little while ago, that Mueller is looking at Cohen for his role in that nexus.
Absolutely. And it's not being done just to squeeze him because he might have evidence, well, not might, he surely has evidence about Donald Trump, but it's being done because he committed crimes. And he should be investigated, he should be indicted, he should be tried if those are the facts that turn out to be true. So it's people are saying, oh, he's just doing this, Mueller's, doing this and having the Southern District do it so that they can squeeze him to testify against Donald Trump. And I would say that when you find crimes, they need to be investigated, and you need to try the people who commit them.
Well, I should clarify, right? In this case, probable cause, right? And the probable cause enough to reach the bar to be signed off at by DOJ, the number 2 at DOJ, Rosenstein, and a federal magistrate to raid a lawyer to the President of the United States, which you got to think is something. Nick Ackerman, Jill Wine-Banks, great to have you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, the president wrongly tells the world the nuclear threat from North Korea is over and calls the journalists who fact-check him enemies of the state. Donald Trump's attack on a free press after befriending.
What surprised you today about Kim Jong-un?
Really, he's got a great personality. He's a, funny guy. He's a very smart guy. He's a great negotiator. He loves his people. Not that I'm surprised by that, but he loves his people. And I think that we have the start of an amazing deal.
But he's starved them. He's been brutal to them. He still loves his people.
Look, he's doing what he's seen done. I mean, if you look at it, but I really have to go by today and by yesterday and by a couple of weeks ago, because that's really when this whole thing started.
Donald Trump has looked back weeks into Kim Jong-un's record and decided he really likes the cut of this dictator's jib. It's not particularly surprising. Trump has praised Kim before and has a well-established affinity for strongmen and human rights abusers around the globe. And so, after spending some quality time with another brutal despot this morning, the president has returned to America sounding more and more like one himself. Today, he declared, absurdly, that there is no longer a nuclear threat from North Korea, and that the true enemy is anyone who would tell you otherwise, namely the institutions which keep the American people informed. Our country's biggest enemy is the fake news so easily promulgated by fools. Congressman Ted Lieu is a Democratic representative from California, and he joins me now. Congressman, your response to the president's comments about the folks that are trying to keep Americans informed.
Well, today's Wednesday. That means the president is lying again. Clearly, there's still a nuclear threat from North Korea. And the parallels to Watergate are striking because the last president that constantly attacked the free press was Richard Nixon. And what the press is actually doing is simply pointing out the facts about what happened at the summit in North Korea, which is that not very much. So we're going to have to wait a while to see if it was a success or a total failure.
The phrase enemy of the people, what does that conjure for you?
It actually conjures Richard Nixon and Watergate in my mind, because that is the phrase that Richard Nixon also used. But it's very alarming for the President of the United States to attack the First Amendment and the free press in this manner. And unfortunately, when you watch Fox Primetime News, it looks like it's turned into state TV. So thank you to MSNBC and other networks for not doing that.
Well, see, here, there's another interview with out today, largely a friendly interview, in which the president sort of says about Kim Jong-un, and look, you got to hand it the guy, he got the job when he was so young. I mean, it's hard to be that young. And the interviewer says, well, he killed lots of people. He says, well, lots of countries do lots of things. Like, he has spent the last 2 days ceaselessly praising the management style, the leadership abilities, the personality traits, and the heart of Kim Jong-un.
What Donald Trump is doing is totally bizarre. The leader of North Korea killed a relative with poison. He shot another loyalist with an anti-aircraft gun. He has labor camps. If someone does something wrong in North Korea, they could take 3 generations of their family and put them into labor camps. All at the same time with the president now attacking Canada, of all places. So what Donald Trump is doing makes no sense, and I'm alarmed that more Republicans across the aisle are not speaking up.
There's also this report, which I thought was interesting, that there's a Trump appointee who is now looking at the loyalty of federal employees. These are civil servants, right, not appointees. Senior advisor of the State Department appointed just 2 months ago has been quietly vetting career diplomats. Again, career diplomats. These are parts of the civil service and American employees of international institutions to determine whether they are loyal to President Donald Trump and his political agenda. Is that appropriate?
Not only is that not appropriate, that also strikes me as it could be illegal because federal employees only take one oath, and that's an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. And it's gotten so bad with the Trump administration that on the House Judiciary Committee, I now will ask witnesses that appear sometimes if they've taken a loyalty oath to this president. That should never be a question that any elected official needs to ask because everyone needs to understand they did not take an oath to an administration or a party or a particular person. It's all an oath to the Constitution.
I'm confused. And people, do you ask that because people have taken an explicit loyalty oath to the president?
The public reporting is that some officials have taken loyalty oaths to President Trump, or at least he's demanded a loyalty oath from them.
All right. Well, I would love to see them. I wonder who wrote the loyalty oath. Do you think ultimately that the president's performance in North Korea is going to endure in terms of how he thinks about what happened there and how people on Capitol Hill think about it?
I previously served on active duty under U.S. Pacific Command, and it's very clear to me the U.S. has no good military options. So I supported this summit, and I support diplomacy. So honestly, it's way too early to tell if North Korea is going to denuclearize or if they're going to do the same thing they did with previous administrations and break all their promises. But what we do know is, as of today, North Korea has not gotten rid of a single nuke, a single missile, or any of their chemical or biological weapons. So I have no idea how the president can try to tell the American people that North Korea is no longer a nuclear threat.
I don't think this story can end without Kim playing around at Mar-a-Lago. I think that's absolutely will happen. Congressman Ted Lieu, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
After the break, primary voters rejecting candidates that have crossed Donald Trump. They'd rather nominate anyone else, like, say, someone that owns and runs a brothel. That story and Donald Trump's hostile takeover, maybe not so hostile.